Want to start by saying I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the honest truth. I wasn't supposed to be on Helix Station 9, wasn't supposed to be working in the armor maintenance bay on level 14, and I definitely wasn't supposed to be the only human in a repair bay full of Velthari soldiers who all looked at me like I was something that had crawled out from between the deck plates. But life doesn't ask you where you want to be. It just puts you somewhere and says deal with it. So let me tell you how I ended up in that place at that moment, holding a plasma torch in one hand and a piece of shattered exoplating in the other, and somehow, without meaning to, without even thinking, said the one word that would change everything. My name is Marcus Calloway. I'm from a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania called Harrisburg's Ridge. Population 7,000, a diner on Main Street that still uses paper menus, and a sky that turns this specific shade of orange every autumn that I've never seen replicated anywhere in the galaxy. And I mean that literally. I've been to 11 star systems now. I've seen sunsets over gas giant rings and twin star rises over crystalline oceans, and not one of them looked like home in October. I joined the Terran Integration Corps at 23, not because I had some burning patriotic fire in me. I didn't. I joined because I was good with my hands, I was good with machines, and the galaxy had just opened up, and I figured if I was going to spend my life fixing things, I might as well fix things that mattered. Things that were more interesting than the heating systems in my uncle's warehouse, which is what I was doing before I shipped out. They trained me as an armor specialist. That means I fix combat suits, exoframes, battle plating, integrated shield arrays, power coupling systems, all of it. It's not glamorous work. You're basically a mechanic, except the oil is plasma residue and the parts cost more than a house back on Earth, and sometimes the suit you're fixing still has someone's dried blood on the inside of it, and you have to pretend that doesn't bother you. It bothers you. After basic training, I was assigned to the Terran Galactic Joint Operations Command, which sounds impressive until you understand that humans were about 3 years into contact with the wider galaxy, and we were still very much the new arrivals. The Galactic Compact had existed for something like 800 years. 800 years of history, politics, warfare, alliances, betrayals. 800 years of a civilization we knew absolutely nothing about. And humans just showed up at the edge of it like we'd arrived late to a party that had already moved past the fun phase into the complicated part where everyone's tired, and some people have history with each other. The Integration Corps was humanity's way of trying to slot itself into that structure without causing too much disruption. My assignment was Helix Station 9. Helix Station 9 sits at the junction of 3 major transit lanes in what the Compact calls the Outer Spiral, the far reaches of colonized space where the infrastructure is thinner, the politics are messier, and the military presence is heavier. It's not a pretty station. It was built for function, not aesthetics. 6 levels of docking bays, 8 levels of crew quarters, 4 levels of operations, and various levels of maintenance, storage, and what I can only describe as the kind of spaces that exist in every large structure where things end up that don't belong anywhere else. Level 14 was an armor maintenance bay. Big, cold, fluorescent in that specific way that military facilities are fluorescent, like the lights are angry at you. Rows of workbenches, wall-mounted tool racks, charging pylons for power cells, diagnostic terminals at every station. The smell was always the same. Plasma burn, metal shavings, the faint chemical tang of hydraulic seal compound. I'd been there 6 weeks when Commanding Senior Vale Thessarin walked into my life. And I mean walked. She walked like the floor should consider itself honored. Let me tell you about the Velthari before I tell you about her, because you need to understand what they are to understand why that first moment hit me so differently than I expected. The Velthari are one of the founding species of the Galactic Compact. Old civilization, older than most. They're humanoid in the loosest sense, 2 arms, 2 legs, bilateral symmetry. But they stand taller than humans by about a foot on average, and their proportions are different, longer-limbed, narrower through the torso, with this quality of movement that's hard to describe, but that I always thought of as deliberate. Like they never took a step they hadn't already decided on 3 seconds earlier. Their skin is a deep, rich melanin, ranging from the color of dark amber to something close to obsidian, and it has this faint quality that I noticed the first time I saw one in good lighting. Not glow, exactly. More like how a very dark stone looks in sunlight. There's a depth to it, a warmth that you don't expect until you're up close. Their eyes are large, larger than human eyes, set slightly wider, and they come in colors that don't exist in human biology: deep violet, amber gold, pale silver that looks almost white, some shade of dark blue-green that I don't even have a good English word for. And the way they look at you, the Velthari have a gaze that is completely level, completely still. They don't do the thing humans do where our eyes are always moving a little, always tracking, always fidgeting. When a Velthari looks at you, they look at you. They have secondary eyelids, thin, translucent. They close laterally rather than vertically. I found this out because I caught Thesarin using hers once in bright light, and it startled me enough that I dropped the wrench I was holding. Their hair, if you can call it that, it's actually a different tissue type than human hair, something between keratin and cartilage, grows in ridged formations along the crown and back of the skull and down the nape of the neck. It doesn't move the way human hair moves. It shifts in response to emotional state, though I didn't know that when I first met her. And militarily, the Velthari military is one of the most respected in the Compact. Not because they're the strongest or the fastest or the most numerous, because they are, as a culture, extraordinarily disciplined. They do not move without purpose. They do not speak without meaning. They have a concept. I'll try to translate it as Tharvan, which roughly means the grace inherent in doing exactly what is necessary and nothing more. It's a philosophy, a military doctrine, and a personal value all at once. Vale is a rank. It translates to something between captain and senior field commander, an officer who leads not just their unit, but also has tactical authority in their operational zone. It's a title that takes most Velthari 15 to 20 years to earn. Thesarin had earned it at 9. She came to level 14 on a Tuesday, or what we called Tuesday on Helix Station 9, where the day cycle was artificially maintained for the benefit of the various species aboard who needed circadian rhythm. It was the kind of afternoon where the maintenance bay was quieter than usual, half the crew on a rotation break. One of the diagnostic terminals down for calibration. The hum of the station's ventilation system louder than normal because someone in environmental had been running tests all day. I was at bench 7 working on a shattered pauldron from a standard Velthari field kit. Some unit had come through from a skirmish in the outer margins, and there was a backlog of damaged gear. Nothing unusual. Just the routine work of patching up the things that had gotten between soldiers and whatever was trying to kill them. I heard the door. That's the first thing I noticed about her. The door opened, and she didn't look at the room the way most people look at a room. She looked at the room the way a person looks at a situation they are about to manage. It's a small difference. Most people scan, she assessed. Behind her, 2 junior Velthari soldiers, Varin was what they called them, a step below full combat rank, carried a case between them. Armor case. Big one. And even from across the room, I could see that whatever was in it had taken a serious hit. She crossed the floor to my bench like she already knew I was the one she needed to talk to. Maybe she'd been briefed. Maybe she just picked the human on the basis that the human was the most visibly out of place, and therefore probably the most specialized. Either way, she stopped in front of my station, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, that full Velthari gaze, completely level, absolutely still, and said, in compact standard, "I require your expertise. This is priority classification. I was told your work meets the standard." I remember thinking that was an interesting way to introduce yourself, not as a compliment exactly, but as a statement of conditional respect. I was told your work meets the standard, meaning she hadn't decided yet. She was giving me the opportunity to prove the statement true. I said, "Set it on the bench. Let me see what we're working with." And that was how it started. Part 2, the armor and what it meant. Velthari combat armor is not like human combat armor. I need you to understand this because it matters to the story, and because I think a lot of people, even people who work in integrated military contexts, don't really get it until they've had one in front of them in pieces. Human combat armor is engineering. It's a problem we solved. How do you protect a body? How do you give it capability? How do you balance weight and protection and power consumption? We solved it with materials science and computer integration and iterative design. It's good work. I'm proud of it. But it's engineering. Velthari combat armor is that, and something else. It's also testimony. Every Velthari soldier begins with a base issue suit. Standard military grade, good protection, reliable systems, identical to every other suit off the same production run. But the moment you put it on for the first time, it begins to change. Not through any mystical process, through very deliberate, very personal modification. Over the course of a career, a Vilthari soldier remakes their armor. The modifications are not purely functional. They're a record, sigils in the plating that mark significant engagements. Repair patterns that are deliberately maintained rather than replaced. A piece of plating that survived a battle where others didn't get repaired but not replaced, and the repair mark stays. Calibrations in the joints and movement systems that reflect the specific body and movement style of the individual wearing it. By the time a Vilthari soldier reaches senior rank, their armor is a document. It says, "I was here, I survived this, I did this. I am this." The armor that the Varin placed on my bench was one of these documents, and it had been seriously, badly damaged. The left shoulder assembly was shattered, not just cracked, shattered the way ceramic composite shatters when it takes a direct high-velocity impact. The power coupling on the left side was severed, which meant all the systems on that side, shield emitter, sensor node, haptic feedback layer, were completely offline. The chest plating had a burn through it, a deep score from what I recognized as a heavy plasma discharge, someone's anti-armor weapon fired at extremely close range. The right gauntlet's finger actuation system was jammed, which I knew because when I tested it, the fingers wouldn't close past about 60%. And throughout all of it, the shattered shoulder, the burned scar, the damaged gauntlet, there were those marks, the deliberate record, the sigils and the intentional repairs and the individual calibrations that had been built up over what I estimated, looking at it, was probably 15 or more years of service. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. Behind me, Thessarin waited. She didn't lean on the bench. She didn't look at her communicator. She stood with her hands behind her back, and she waited. I turned around. "How long do I have?" She said, 48 standard hours. My unit moves in 52. I looked back at the armor. "It's going to take all 48. Then use all 48. I said one more thing. Some of the plating, I'm going to have to fabricate replacements. When I'm doing the surface finishing, I'm going to need to know what marks were on the sections that are too damaged to recover. I can replicate the physical profile of the sigils if I know what they looked like." She was quiet for a moment, a long moment for a Vilthari. "I will provide that information. I'll need you here then, for reference, on and off over the 48 hours. Another pause. "Understood." She left, her 2 Varin followed. I turned back to the armor and got to work. The first 12 hours were diagnosis and stripping. That's the unglamorous part of armor work that nobody outside the field really thinks about. Before you can fix anything, you have to understand exactly what's wrong with everything. You have to test every system, trace every circuit, map every fracture. You have to figure out what can be saved and what has to go. With Vilthari armor, that's more complicated than with standard issue because the modifications aren't always documented in the suit's integrated system. Some of them are pure mechanical, physical changes to the plating geometry that aren't reflected in any software. Some of them are electrical modifications that were done by hand, outside of standard specs. You find them when you're tracing a circuit and suddenly hit a junction that shouldn't be there according to the schematic. I found 7 of those in Thessarin's armor. 7 places where someone, her, presumably over years, had gone in and changed something that the original designers hadn't anticipated. 3 of them were efficiency improvements that were genuinely clever. One was a modification to the shield emitter's resonance frequency that I recognized as a known technique for improving effectiveness against a specific type of weapon. 2 were changes to the haptic feedback system that I couldn't fully interpret. They'd do something, but I'd need to wear the suit to know what, and I obviously couldn't do that. The 7th one was in the chest plate. The burn had gone through it. The plasma discharge had burned through not just the outer plating, but the intermediate layer and the inner lining. When I removed the damaged chest section and got it under the detailed scanner, I found that the modification inside, a secondary power routing system, elegant, very compact, had been completely destroyed by the burn. But on the outer surface of the inner lining, before the burn, there had been a sigil. I could see the edges of it, the parts the burn hadn't touched. I couldn't tell what it had been. Whatever the central image was, it was gone. I sat there for a while looking at the edges of the burned sigil and thinking about what that meant. She came back at the 14-hour mark. I'd been working essentially continuously. Except for a 2-hour sleep cycle, I'd forced myself to take in the small rest room off the maintenance bay. Coffee, real Terran coffee, not the compact's various approximations, was the only thing between me and incoherence, and I was on my third cup when she walked in. She looked at the bench, at the armor which I had partially disassembled and laid out in a way that probably looked alarming to anyone who wasn't used to mid-repair states. Parts organized by category, damaged sections tagged and sorted. The pieces I'd already diagnosed and cleared, the pieces awaiting parts fabrication, the pieces in the active repair stage. "You work quickly," she said. "I work accurately," I said. "Quick is a side effect." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile. Velthari faces don't do what human faces do with smiling. They have different expressive architecture, but something. A slight adjustment around the eyes. I filed it away as something like approval, maybe. I took her through what I'd found. The system-by-system breakdown, what could be saved, what needed replacement parts, what I was going to fabricate locally, and what I'd already put in a rush requisition for from the station's parts inventory. She listened without interrupting. When I got to the 7 modifications, I walked her through each one and what I'd found and what I was planning to do to preserve them through the repair. When I described the chest modification, the secondary power router, she said quietly, "You found that." "I find everything," I said. "I'm thorough." Most technicians would have simply replaced the chest section without noting the internal modification. Most technicians would have, I agreed. But that routing system was doing something specific. I need to understand what it was doing before I decide how to restore it. She was quiet for a moment. It was a backup power continuity system. If the primary coupling severs, as it did in this engagement, the secondary maintains power to the left shield emitter for approximately 12 additional seconds, enough time to find cover. I looked at her. 12 seconds, that's what she'd built into her armor. 12 extra seconds if everything else failed. "That's how you survived," I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer, but the thing that was like approval in her expression shifted into something else that I didn't have a word for yet. I said, "I'll restore it. Better if I can. I have some ideas about the routing efficiency." "Do not alter the function." "I won't. I'll just make it run cleaner." She looked at me for a long moment with that perfectly still Velthari gaze. Then she said, "The sigil on the chest section, you said it was unrecoverable. The central image is gone. I can see the border elements. I can reconstruct the frame if you tell me what was in the center." Another long pause. It was the marks of my unit's first engagement, all those who fought with me, their identifiers. I didn't say anything immediately. I thought about that. About a piece of armor that carried the names of the people you'd first gone to war with. About what it meant to have that burned away. "Tell me the identifiers," I said. "All of them, I'll put them back." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she sat down on the stool across the bench from me and started telling me the names. Part 3, what 48 hours teaches you. There is a specific kind of intimacy in the work. Not the intimacy you might be thinking of, not yet. This was a different kind, the intimacy of attention. When you repair something that matters to someone, really repair it, not just swap out the functional parts and send it back, but actually engage with the thing they've made of it, trace the history of it, understand the choices that went into every modification, you end up knowing them in a way that's hard to explain. You know how they move because the calibrations tell you. You know what they fear sometimes because of what they reinforced. You know what they've survived because the repair marks are a record. By the 30-hour mark, I knew Vale Thesarin better than I'd known most people I'd worked alongside for months. She came back 4 times during the repair, sometimes just to check progress. Sometimes to answer questions. There were joints in the left shoulder assembly where the geometry of her modifications was complex enough that I needed her to physically demonstrate the movement range she needed, so I could calibrate correctly. She'd stand there in the maintenance bay in her duty uniform, moving her shoulder through the range of motion, and I'd watch and measure and adjust. Once she asked what I was doing with the gauntlet specifically, because I was taking longer on it than the rest. I told her the finger actuation jam was actually a symptom of a deeper problem, a hairline stress fracture in the underlying skeletal frame of the glove that I'd found with the deep scanner. Whoever had repaired this last had patched the surface, but hadn't caught the fracture. Left unaddressed, it would have failed completely, probably at the worst possible moment. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "When was the prior repair made?" "About 14 months ago, based on the material dating." "That was Jothran Station, after the corridor campaign." "Did whoever repaired it at Jothran see the fracture?" "They said the gauntlet was cleared." I didn't say anything to that, just kept working. But I thought someone had missed it. Someone had cleared a piece of armor that would have failed in the field, and this woman had been moving through 14 months of engagements, with that fracture getting a little worse every time she made a fist. I went back to the gauntlet, and I took my time with it. It was around the 36th hour when things shifted. I'd been working in near silence for most of the session. Thesarin was across the bench from me, watching me work on the left shoulder assembly. I was doing the surface finishing on the replacement pauldron, replicating the sigil markings she'd described to me, using an engraving stylus that required steady hands and full concentration. The maintenance bay was quiet. Most of the other techs were on night cycle. The ventilation hum was the main sound, and the soft hiss of the engraving stylus, and occasionally the click of a tool being set down. I'd been working on the sigil for about 40 minutes. It was a complex one, layered, the kind of design that builds outward from a central symbol with additional marks around it that add context and history. I'd reconstructed it from her description and the reference images she'd pulled from her personal archive, and now I was replicating it in the surface of the new plating, working from the center outward. I was in the zone that I get into sometimes with fine detail work, not thinking in words, just hands and eyes and the work. And I finished the central sigil, and I lifted the stylus, and I sat back to assess the result, the way you do when you want to see the whole thing rather than just the section you've been working on, and that was when I actually looked at the suit. The whole suit, as it was at that moment. Because we'd been working through the night, and I'd been going piece by piece, I hadn't actually stepped back and seen it assembled since the beginning. And at this stage, probably 70% of it was done. The chest was repaired and polished, the burns filled and the surface finished, the new sigil perfectly placed. The right shoulder was done. The gauntlet, newly repaired down to the skeletal frame, was done. The power coupling was restored and tested. The shield emitter was recalibrated. And in the light of the maintenance bay, under those harsh fluorescent panels that I always thought were angry. It was beautiful. I know how that sounds. It's armor. It's military hardware. It's a thing made to protect a body in situations that are trying to damage or kill that body. But it was beautiful, the way some things that have survived a lot are beautiful. The way the repair marks told the story of what it had been through and what had been done to keep it whole. The way the modifications reflected a person's specific knowledge and judgment and experience. The way the sigils built a record of a life spent in service to something bigger than the individual names of the first unit, marks of the campaigns, the small personal geometry of a life put in armor. I sat there looking at it. And then, without looking up, without really thinking about it, I said, "God, she's beautiful." I didn't realize I'd said it out loud until the silence in the room changed. You know how silence can change quality. There are different kinds of quiet. The quiet of an empty room and the quiet of a room where someone has just stopped breathing normally are very different things. I looked up. Thesarin was looking at me. Not with the full Velthari assessment gaze that she'd had when she first walked in. This was different. Her large amber gold eyes were a fraction wider than usual. The ridged formations along her crown, her Velthari hair, had shifted. Subtly, but I noticed it because I'd been watching her for 36 hours, and I'd learned to read those small shifts. I realized with a slow sinking feeling that I had said she, and she was the only she in the room. "I meant the armor," I said immediately. "I was talking about the armor, I meant the suit." She said nothing, still looking at me. "It's a beautiful piece of work," I said, and my voice had gone slightly strange, the way your voice goes when you're trying to sound normal and it's actively working against you. "The craftsmanship, what you've built into it over the years, I gestured vaguely at the suit. "It's a beautiful thing." Silence. I'm going to keep working now, I said. She said, say it again. I stopped moving. My hand, which had been reaching for the engraving stylus, stopped. Pardon, I said. What you said? Her voice was absolutely even. That Vilthari control, that Tharvan quality, doing exactly what is necessary. Say it again. I looked at her. She was looking at me with those amber gold eyes, and there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen before in 36 hours of working in close quarters, and I was having significant difficulty reading it. And I was simultaneously very aware that this was a highly ranked officer of a founding compact species. And I was a human technician who had just accidentally said something extremely ambiguous in a quiet maintenance bay at 3 in the artificial morning. Vale Thesarin, I said carefully, I want to be clear about what I meant. I understood what you meant. A pause. Say it again regardless. I took a breath. I looked at the armor. I looked at her. I thought about 36 hours of attention and what attention does. How it teaches you things about the object of that attention that you couldn't have predicted. How you can spend time with a piece of armor and come to understand the person who built it. How that understanding, if you are paying real attention, has a quality that is not purely technical. I said, she's beautiful. And this time, without entirely meaning to, I was looking at her when I said it. Part 4, what happened in the 12 remaining hours. What happened next was not what you might expect. She didn't do anything dramatic, she didn't move. The ridged formations along her crown shifted again, a fuller, more deliberate movement, and she looked at me for a very long moment with those amber gold eyes, and then she said, "Tell me why. Not why do you think I'm beautiful, not why did you say that. Tell me why." As if she wanted the actual reasoning, the specific evidence, the particular elements that led to the conclusion. I should not have been surprised by this. This was the Vilthari way. Tharvan, do exactly what is necessary, ask the precise question. None of the human dance around a thing, none of the circular approach. She wanted to understand what I'd meant, so she asked. I said, do you want me to talk about the armor, or? I want you to talk about what you meant. I put down the stylus. Okay, I said. And I told her. I told her about the way the suit read, now that I'd been through all of it. The way every modification told me something about the choices she'd made. The secondary power router, the 12 extra seconds, and what that told me about how she thought about survival. Not dramatically, not heroically. Practically. She'd built herself an extra 12 seconds because 12 seconds might be enough. And if you plan for the moment when everything else has failed, you survive the moment when everything else has failed. I told her about the modifications to the shoulder joint geometry, which had told me she favored a specific combat posture that most Vilthari tactical doctrine didn't use, a closer engagement range than standard, which meant she trusted her hand-to-hand capability and wasn't interested in maintaining the comfortable distance that made you less vulnerable. She'd made herself more vulnerable in one way to be more effective in another. That was a choice. That was judgment about what she was good at and what she was willing to risk. I told her about the 7 circuit modifications and the ones I thought were elegant, and why I thought they were elegant. The efficiency improvements, the way they'd simplified routing paths that the original designers had overcomplicated, not through brilliance, but through practical experience with how the suit actually performed in the field. The kind of knowledge you only get by wearing something through a lot of situations it wasn't designed for. I told her about the sigils, about what it meant to me to put other people's names on your armor and carry them with you. I didn't have a Vilthari cultural framework for it. I just had my human one. I grew up in a town where the VFW hall has a wall of names on it. People who went away and came back and people who went away and didn't. And the fact of putting names on a wall as a kind of carrying them forward, as a refusal to let them be only in the past. That's what I understood it to mean. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Vilthari sigil practice meant something entirely different. But to me, looking at those marks, it looked like she'd built a way to carry people with her. I said, that's why. Because you built this over 15 years or more, and it's a record of how you think and what you've survived and who you've served with, and that record is it's not just functional, it's human. I paused. Vilthari, I mean, but you know what I mean. She was quiet for a while. I do, she said, know what you mean. I picked up the stylus again. I'm going to finish the shoulder sigil. Yes, she said. But she didn't leave. She stayed for the rest of the repair. Not hovering, not supervising. She sat on the stool across the bench, and sometimes she watched me work, and sometimes she was on her communicator reviewing operational data, and we talked. Not constantly, there were long stretches of quiet where I was deep in detailed work that required concentration. But in the spaces, we talked. She asked me questions about human armor systems. Not polite interest questions, actual technical questions, the kind that come from genuine curiosity about how another civilization solved the same problems you've been working on. Some of her questions were so specific that I had to think hard to answer them, and I realized she had a deep understanding of the engineering involved, not just as a user of the armor, but as someone who had spent a long time thinking carefully about how armor works and why. I asked her questions, too. About the modifications, partly. There were things I still didn't fully understand, and I wanted to get them right. But also about the Vilthari approach to armor generally, and what Tharvan actually meant in practice, because I'd been using the word mentally without being fully sure I was using it correctly. She explained it, not with a definition. She started with an example. She said there was a concept in Vilthari martial practice of the unnecessary motion. An unnecessary motion is not just wasteful, it's a kind of dishonesty. It says you don't know precisely what you're doing, or you're performing something rather than doing it. The highest form of any skill, combat, craftsmanship, communication, is the removal of unnecessary motion. What remains is what is true. Your work, she said, has very few unnecessary motions. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. That's a compliment, she said, as if she'd noticed I wasn't sure. I know, I said. I was just thank you. It is accurate. I know that too. The secondary eyelids closed briefly, laterally, and then opened again. I'd started to understand that this was the Vilthari equivalent of a blink, but one that indicated something more than the physical. Something like consideration, like giving a thoughtful attention before releasing it. You said my armor was beautiful, she said. Yes. Earlier you also said you used the pronoun she before you specified the armor. I put the stylus down again. Yes, I noticed that. Did you mean the armor? I thought about it carefully, because she'd asked carefully and she deserved a careful answer. I meant the armor first, I said. The suit, what you've made of it, but I stopped. I was aware of the ambiguity. When I said it again, I was aware of it. She looked at me. The armor is the record, I said. You made the armor. They're not separate things. Whatever is, I searched for the right word. Whatever is admirable about the armor is yours. It came from you. Is that how humans think about it? I don't know how humans think about it. It's how I think about it. She was quiet for what felt like a full minute. Then she said, in Vilthari there is a word, the ravel. It describes the quality of a thing that has been made with genuine attention. Not just skill. Attention. The difference is that skill can be applied without caring about the specific thing you're making, but attention cannot. You cannot give something real attention and remain separate from it. I listened. Your work on this armor has the ravel, she said. I recognized it by the 14th hour. I thought about the 14-hour mark, about when she'd come back the first time and what she'd said. You work quickly, and my answer, I work accurately. Quick is a side effect. Is that why you stayed? I asked. The secondary eyelids again? Partly. I waited. I also wanted to understand, she said, what kind of person talks to the armor while they work. I had in fact been talking to the armor. Quietly, mostly, the way I always do with complicated repair work, a habit I'd had since I was a teenager working on machines with my grandfather. You narrate the problem to yourself, out loud, because hearing your own words changes how you think about what you're saying. It's a concentration technique. You heard that, I said. At approximately the 19th hour, you told the chest section that the routing problem was like it was designed by someone who had never met a power coupling in their life. At the 26th hour, you informed the left shoulder assembly that it had no business being this interesting, and told it to stop being complicated for 5 minutes. I put my face in my hands. I wasn't aware, I said through my hands, that I had an audience. I was not there for all of it, she said. I checked the bay monitor from my quarters. I looked up. There's a monitor feed. Yes. You were watching the monitor. I wanted to know if you slept. I stared at her. You had not slept by the 24th hour, she said, and I considered whether to intervene. Why didn't you? You solved the routing problem at the 25th hour. It seemed inadvisable to interrupt. You were watching me work from your quarters at the 25th hour. She looked at me with those amber gold eyes and said nothing. I turned back to the armor. Right, I said, okay. But I was smiling and I couldn't quite stop. Part 5, the finishing. The 47th hour. 1 hour left before the deadline. 47 hours in, I was sitting with the completed suit in front of me doing the final systems check. Power coupling holding, shield emitter calibrated and tested, sensor node online. Gauntlet actuation running smooth through full range. I'd tested it 5 times because I wanted to be absolutely certain the fracture repair was solid. Left shoulder assembly rebuilt and calibrated. Chest section with the restored sigils, the names of the first unit, restored to the center of the plate. And the secondary power router restored inside the chest section. Better than before, actually. I'd found a cleaner routing path that reduced resistance and would give her 14 seconds instead of 12. I hadn't altered the function. I just made it run cleaner. All 7 modifications preserved. The surface finishing done to match the original weathering, the marks of service, without erasing them. I'd worked to make the new sections red as part of the same history, not replacements that announced themselves. I ran the final diagnostic, everything green. I sat back in the chair and looked at it. 47 hours of work. My hands were steady but tired. My eyes were dry. I'd had 11 cups of coffee in the last 2 days, and I was at the point where the coffee wasn't making me alert anymore. It was just maintaining a kind of baseline functionality that kept me from falling asleep mid-thought. But the armor was done. And it was good work. I knew it was good work. Not modestly, not performatively. Just the plain, honest recognition that I'd done the best work I was capable of, and my best work was good. Thesarin was there. She'd come back at the 45th hour. She was standing a few feet from the bench, looking at the suit. After a long while, she said, "It is whole." Yes. The chest sigil, you restored all the names. All 12. You gave me all 12, and I put all 12 back. If you want to check any of them, I can show you the reference images I worked from. She walked around the bench, slowly, looking at the suit from every angle. Her face was doing something I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Vilthari emotional expression was a language I was only starting to learn, and there were dialects I was still missing. She reached out and touched the chest section. Lightly, just the tips of her fingers against the restored sigil. She stood there for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "All 12. Yes. She took her hand back. She looked at me. You said the secondary router has been improved. 14 seconds now instead of 12. Same function, cleaner path. She was quiet. Also, I said, the fracture in the right gauntlet skeletal frame, the one that wasn't caught at Jothrin. I've replaced the cracked section entirely. I fabricated a new frame component from a material with a higher stress tolerance than the original. It won't fracture that way again. She looked at the gauntlet. The range of motion is identical to your calibrations, I said. I tested it to make sure. You won't feel a difference in combat, except that it won't fail. She said, I was not told about the fracture at Jothrin. I know. I trusted the clearance. I know that's done, it's fixed now. She looked at me for a long moment. Why does it matter to you? I thought about how to answer that. Because you're going to be in it, I said. In 52 hours approximately, you're going to be in this suit in a situation where you need it to work. The fracture would have failed. 14 months it's been getting worse. The next hard engagement, it would have gone. And that would mean your hand wouldn't close past 60% when you needed it to in the middle of whatever's happening out there. I don't know what's happening out there. I don't have clearance for your operational details. But I know that you're going to be in that suit, and the suit needs to work. She was quiet. That's my job, I said. Making sure the suit works, that's what I'm here for. And the 14 seconds instead of 12. I paused. That's just me. She made a sound. I wasn't sure what to call it. It was too low to be a laugh, but it had something of the same quality. Something that acknowledged a moment. Marcus Calloway, she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. Vale Thesarin, I said. You are not what I expected of a human technician. What did you expect? She considered. I expected competence. Humans have demonstrated competence. I did not expect. She stopped, looking for the word. I did not expect the ravel. I thought about what she'd told me the ravel meant. Attention, real attention. The kind that doesn't let you remain separate from the thing. I expect, she said, that I will need this armor repaired again, eventually. Probably, I said, it usually happens. If it is within my choice of technician, she said, I will request you. I looked at her. I'll be here. She held my gaze for a moment, those amber gold eyes in the harsh fluorescent light. You said I was beautiful, she said. I didn't look away. Yes. You meant the armor. I meant both. She was quiet. I know, she said.